An Aries walking into a room often carries a very distinct kind of energy, not loud exactly, but unmistakably present. Almost like the first light of early morning touching a window, Aries are used to speaking their mind, used to reacting quickly when something stirs their heart. Many people look at Aries and assume they are always ready to engage, ready to defend their feelings with honest, straightforward words. But every now and then, life brings a very different moment. A moment when Aries simply stops talking. The room often becomes a little quieter then. A lively conversation softens. Like the wind suddenly pausing in the branches of a tree, Aries is still there, still listening. But those quick, instinctive responses quietly step back, just for a moment. And, strangely, that silence can make people uncomfortable. Some think Aries is being distant. Others assume they must be angry, but if someone looks a little deeper, that silence rarely carries hostility. It feels more like a door, closing very gently. Not because Aries has no feelings left. In fact, sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes there is simply too much moving inside. There were times when Aries spoke quickly, explained everything clearly, hoping others would understand the sincerity in their heart. But after many experiences, Aries slowly begins to notice something simple. Not every word changes the outcome. Some conversations feel like roads already traveled too many times. Aries can almost see the scenery ahead, the same turns, the same endings. And in that moment, they pause. Not because they no longer care, but because they are starting to listen to themselves a little more. Sometimes the silence of Aries feels like taking a deep breath, a very soft pause, where they observe everything around them with a calmness they didn't always know they had. The looks, the words, the things left unsaid. All of it becomes clear when Aries doesn't rush to react. Some Aries have admitted that even they feel surprised by themselves in moments like this. In the past, the instinct was simple. Say what you think immediately. But over time, experience teaches a gentler lesson. Sometimes silence protects the fire within. Because Aries carries powerful energy, they burn brightly for passion, for fairness, for the desire to make things clear. But every flame needs space to breathe. If it burns fiercely in every argument, it eventually grows tired. So, in certain moments of life, Aries learns to take a small step back, not to leave the room, but to see the road more clearly. That silence is not empty. It feels more like a quiet room late at night, where warm yellow light touches the walls, and thoughts slowly begin to settle into place. Aries may sit there for only a few seconds, but inside, many questions are quietly unfolding. Is this something that truly needs to be said? Is this argument worth continuing? Is peace more valuable than being right? And something interesting happens when Aries begins asking questions like these. Growth quietly enters their life. Not everyone notices it. Some people only see the surface of silence and assume Aries has simply become colder. But those who have stood very close to Aries often understand what is really happening. They know Aries still feels everything deeply. The difference is only in how those feelings are expressed, like a flame that has learned to burn steadily instead of flaring up at every spark. Within that quiet, there is still care. Still self-respect. Still the deep sincerity Aries holds for the relationships that truly matter. The only difference is, they no longer need to say everything immediately. Sometimes Aries simply listens. Sometimes they look out a window, as if thinking about a longer road somewhere ahead. And in those quieter moments, a very gentle kind of strength begins to form. A strength that doesn't need to prove itself. And if someone is patient enough to remain in that silence, they may begin to understand something important. The silence of Aries is not distance. It is more like a quiet message that the heart of Aries is learning what truly deserves a place in their life and what can simply drift away. And from that quiet place, the story of Aries keeps moving forward, slowly, like the light spreading across a road at dawn, where people begin to realize that sometimes the things left unsaid can carry far more meaning than any explanation spoken aloud. The morning light from the story we just shared still seems to linger somewhere, as if the small flame inside Aries continues to burn quietly. Only the way it shows itself has changed a little. When people think of Aries, many immediately imagine fire, not the violent fire of a storm, but something more like the flame in a fireplace. Warm, alive, always ready to rise when emotion touches it. Aries carries a natural kind of honesty. When something troubles them, they tend to speak. When something touches their sense of fairness, their response often arrives quickly, like a spark meeting the air. Those who have known Aries for a long time usually understand this well. Aries is not the type to hold everything inside for too long. They appreciate clarity, direct conversations, the feeling that misunderstandings can be placed on the table and looked at honestly. In the early years of their personal growth, Aries often believes something very simple. If they explain sincerely enough, if they speak one more time, eventually others will understand. And, to be fair, that belief isn't naive. It comes from a very genuine kind of passion. But life has a quiet way of slowing people down. Sometimes it happens during a debate that lasts longer than expected. Sometimes after explaining something carefully, yet still seeing doubt in the other person's eyes, or simply that strange feeling when you've said quite a lot already, but the air in the room still feels heavy. Moments like these often leave a small pause inside Aries. Not a sad pause, more like standing at a crossroads, suddenly wondering whether the same road should still be taken. Aries slowly begins to notice something. Not every argument leads to understanding. Some conversations, the more you continue speaking, the wider the distance seems to grow. And, strangely enough, for someone as quick to act as Aries, this realization sometimes arrives slowly. They may try speaking more, explaining more clearly, even holding their patience longer than usual, but after repeating that cycle a few times, a quieter thought begins to appear. Maybe. Not every moment requires proving something. That thought doesn't arrive with noise. It comes softly, like a night breeze slipping through a window, making the flame in the room sway gently before settling again. And Aries begins trying something different. No rush to push back. No need for one more explanation. Just silence. At first, it feels unfamiliar. For Aries, silence can feel like standing still when they are used to moving forward. But the more they experience it, the more they realize something surprising. Silence does not make them weaker. In fact, it feels a little like placing a hand over their own flame and feeling its rhythm. Aries still senses everything clearly. They still recognize what troubles them, what they agree with, what they do not. But instead of turning every feeling into words right away, they begin keeping some of that energy within. Some Aries even joke about this sometimes. They say life feels more peaceful when they don't have to enter every argument around them, not because they stopped caring, but because they began choosing which moments truly deserve their attention. Some conversations are like wind passing along a road. You can pause for a moment, watch it move by, and then continue walking. Aries slowly learns to see things this way. The fire inside them is still there, still warm, still sincere, still ready to rise when something touches the heart deeply, but it no longer needs to burn in every debate. Sometimes Aries simply sits quietly in the corner of a room, listening to the conversations around them, wondering quietly whether they truly need to step into it. The feeling resembles a calm evening in a city when the streetlights remain on, but the rhythm of life begins to slow down. And in those slower moments, Aries begins to notice a different kind of strength. The strength of saving energy for what truly matters. The strength of not letting every argument pull them too far away from their inner peace. Once in a while, if you look closely, you might see Aries smile gently during a conversation where once they would have reacted quickly. Not because they agree with everything, but because they are choosing a softer way to remain present. The flame inside Aries still burns, only now it resembles a steady light in the night, now warm enough to illuminate the road ahead, without needing to flare up just to prove it exists. And, from that quiet place, another awareness begins to grow. almost as if Aries is starting to see the world with slightly more attentive eyes, realizing that sometimes the things that linger in the mind the longest are not the words that were spoken, but the small silences that others unknowingly leave between them. That quiet flame still seems to burn inside Aries, softly, yet unmistakably present, like a small light in a dark room, just enough for someone to see everything around them. And from that quiet place, something rather interesting begins to appear in the way other people see Aries. Strangely enough, it can feel both a little amusing and a little bittersweet. When Aries speaks a lot, when they react quickly, when their emotions appear clearly in every word, people often call them hot-tempered. Some even think Aries is too direct, as too intense, too quick to show everything they feel. But then something changes when Aries begins to grow quieter, when they no longer step into every debate, when they choose to listen instead of respond. Some people start looking at them differently. They assume Aries has become cold. Sometimes Aries simply smiles when they hear that. A quiet smile, a little thoughtful, like someone who has just heard a very familiar story, because from the outside, silence can easily be misunderstood. Someone who once spoke openly, who once expressed everything clearly, suddenly becoming more reserved, can make others feel confused. But if someone looks a little closer, if they sit beside Aries long enough in those quiet moments, they may begin to notice something else. Aries has not become indifferent. If anything, sometimes they feel even more deeply than before. A quick glance that avoids eye contact in conversation. A sentence that sounds normal, but somehow lacks the sincerity it once carried. A small pause in the way someone answers. For many people, those details pass by unnoticed, but for Aries, they appear like small points of light in the dark, not bright or dramatic, but enough to reveal that something has shifted. Aries does not always say what they notice, partly because they understand that not everyone is ready to hear it, and partly because something new is beginning to grow inside them. A kind of quiet stillness, almost like sitting inside an empty church late in the afternoon, soft light passing through stained glass, the air so calm you can almost hear your own breathing. In moments like that, Aries often doesn't feel the need to speak. They simply observe, listen, and let their thoughts move slowly through them. Some people say Aries is like a powerful flame, and perhaps that is true, but fewer people notice that even the strongest flame has moments of stillness. Like a candle placed before an altar in a small church, where many believe God listens to silent prayers, the candle does not speak. It does not explain anything, yet its quiet light still brings comfort. And sometimes, Aries is very much like that. They sit quietly in the middle of a conversation, their eyes resting somewhere ahead, almost as if they are looking through a window into a long afternoon. Not because they have nothing to say. The thoughts are still there. The emotions are still moving inside. They are simply considering. Would these words make things better? Does this truth need to be spoken right now? Or perhaps silence could preserve the peace for everyone. Some Aries have shared that in moments like this, they feel as if they are learning to trust a very gentle kind of guidance from God, not in a loud or rigid way, but as a quiet feeling inside, as if an unseen hand is reminding them that not everything must become an argument. Sometimes calmness itself is a form of strength. So Aries sits there, unhurried, without needing to explain everything immediately. They allow the moment to pass before them, like someone watching a river flow slowly beneath the evening light. Those who glance quickly might think Aries has become distant, but if someone observes more carefully, they may begin to see that this silence carries many things: a little reflection, a little self-respect, and a quiet belief that sometimes truth does not need to be spoken right away. And while Aries remains in that quiet space, another thought slowly begins forming within them, like a soft light spreading through a room, a realization that the peace they have been searching for may not live inside endless debates, but somewhere deeper, within a choice gently forming inside their own heart. That gentle light seems to keep spreading through the story of Aries, much like a long afternoon slowly fading into evening, and somewhere along the way, people begin to realize something quiet and important. Not everything in life needs to be spoken loudly in order to be heard. From the many quiet moments Aries has passed through, a subtle shift begins to form in the way they see the world. The change does not arrive with noise. There is no clear moment where someone can say, this is when Aries became different. It happens more like the changing of a season, when one morning the sunlight touches the window just a little more gently than before. In earlier years, Aries often reacted quickly. When something felt wrong, they wanted to speak immediately. When they felt misunderstood, they wanted to explain right away. Not because Aries enjoys arguing, but because they value clarity. Deep inside them, there has always been a sincere hope that honesty and openness could help people understand each other better. But life, over time, has a quiet way of teaching its lessons. After explaining something many times and seeing the story remain unchanged, after conversations that lasted longer than expected, Aries slowly begins to notice something. Sometimes their energy is being pulled into circles that never truly end, and gradually, another phase of their journey begins. A phase where Aries suddenly finds themselves appreciating quiet mornings more than they used to. A cup of coffee resting on a wooden table, soft steam rising into the air, a street outside the window still calm with very little traffic. Moments like these bring Aries a feeling that is very different. Not the intensity of a debate, not the urge to prove something, just peace. Some Aries have even said they don't quite understand when they began to appreciate these quiet spaces so much. In the past, they often felt the need to move, to act, to speak whatever was on their mind. But in those still mornings, a simple realization begins to settle in. Sometimes peace is more valuable than winning an argument. That thought does not make Aries indifferent to the world. The fire within them is still there. They still care about what feels right, about fairness, about the values they believe matter. But the way they tend that fire has changed. Instead of letting it flare up in every conversation, Aries begins saving some of that energy for what truly matters, like someone tending a fire in a winter home. They don't need the flames to grow too large, just warm enough so the room does not grow cold. And now, silence no longer feels uncomfortable. It is no longer an empty space that makes Aries feel restrained. Instead, it feels like a deep breath after a long day, a moment where they can pause, look at the world around them with calmer eyes. In those quiet breaths, Aries sometimes remembers simple teachings about peace. Some find comfort in passages of the Bible, where it is said that God does not always speak through powerful winds or loud thunder, but sometimes through a very gentle breeze. That thought often makes Aries smile, because life feels very similar. Not every meaningful moment arrives with noise. Often, the deepest truths arrive in silence. And so Aries begins to cherish those peaceful mornings, sitting there with a cup of coffee, watching the light slowly spread across the road outside, feeling a wide open space inside their heart. No need to react immediately, no need to prove anything in that moment. Just breathe a little slower, and in that slower rhythm, Aries begins to understand something. Protecting their inner peace can be a kind of strength, a strength that does not need to be seen, yet is powerful enough to carry them through life with a lighter heart. And from those quiet mornings, Aries also begins to notice something else. Some of the people around them seem to understand this change almost immediately, as if they can sense that the silence of Aries is not distance at all, but a quiet kind of growth slowly unfolding along their path. The peace Aries begins to discover in those quiet mornings slowly starts to change the way they look at the relationships around them. When someone learns how to keep a little breathing space for themselves, they also begin to notice something else. They begin to see who is truly able to walk beside them in those quiet spaces. And, interestingly enough, not everyone understands the silence of Aries. Some people knew Aries when they were more outspoken, quick to react, quick to speak their mind. So when Aries becomes a little quieter, a little more reflective, those people sometimes feel confused. Some think Aries is becoming distant, others assume they've grown colder than before, but the ones who have stayed close to Aries long enough often see something very different. They understand that this silence does not carry distance. Instead, it feels more like Aries is having a quiet conversation with their own heart. Sometimes Aries sits quietly during a discussion, their gaze drifting slightly into the distance, almost like someone listening to a very small thought forming inside. For people who aren't familiar with Aries, the atmosphere might feel a little unusual, but for those who truly understand them, they recognize it as a moment when Aries is simply gathering their emotions. Maybe Aries is thinking about what truly mattered in the conversation that just passed. Maybe they are trying to keep the fire inside them from flaring up too quickly. Or sometimes, they are simply choosing not to make things more complicated than they need to be. The people who understand Aries usually don't rush to ask questions. They don't push with things like, "What are you thinking?" or "Why are you so quiet?" Instead, they choose a softer way of being there. They simply sit beside them. Maybe it's a close friend sitting with Aries on the front steps in the evening. Maybe it's a family member quietly pouring another cup of tea in a peaceful kitchen. Or sometimes, it's just someone's presence nearby. No long conversation. No pressure to explain. And, strangely enough, that quiet presence often makes Aries feel understood more than any long explanation ever could, because Aries has never really been the type to turn their emotions into a speech. What they often need most is simply knowing that someone is patient enough to remain beside them in that silence. Some Aries have even shared that the people who make them feel most at ease are those who know how to listen without rushing to judge. People who can sit with them in stillness, like two people looking out of the same window on a long afternoon. In moments like that, Aries often feels their hearts soften. No need to prove anything, no need to explain every emotion, just the quiet reassurance that their silence is not being misunderstood. Perhaps that is why, over time, Aries begins to value simpler relationships, not the ones filled with constant noise and conversation, but the ones with enough quiet for both people to feel safe being themselves. Some Aries even describe those moments as carrying a very special kind of peace, almost like stepping into a quiet church late in the afternoon. No need to speak loudly, no need to do anything remarkable, just sitting there in gentle light, feeling as though God is listening to everything inside their heart, even the things never spoken out loud. That thought alone often brings Aries a sense of relief, because they begin to understand something important. Not every emotion needs to be explained right away. Some feelings simply need to be felt and placed down gently in stillness. And the people who truly care about Aries seem to understand that as well. They don't rush to break the silence. They don't demand answers. They simply stay. And sometimes, that quiet presence becomes its own language between people who understand each other. No many words needed. Yet still enough for Aries to feel they are not alone in their search for inner peace. And when Aries begins to realize that there are still people on their path willing to walk beside them in such a simple way, another quiet thought starts to form within their heart, like a small flame just lit in the night, reminding them that silence is not only a way to protect themselves, but also a language the heart sometimes uses to speak. And when Aries begins to realize that along the road of life, there are still people willing to walk beside them in such a simple, quiet way, something very gentle begins to grow inside their heart. It does not arrive like a grand conclusion, nor like a lesson spoken out loud. It feels more like a quiet understanding slowly forming after years of observing life. And over time, Aries begins to notice something they may not have paid attention to before. Not every message needs to be spoken. In earlier days, Aries was used to expressing their emotions openly. When they were happy, their laughter was genuine. When they were hurt, they rarely hid it. And when something didn't feel right, Aries often spoke up immediately, so everything could become clear. And in truth, That openness has always been one of the most beautiful parts of Aries, a kind of honesty that never wanted to hide. But life, slowly, begins teaching them another language, a quieter one. There may come a day when Aries quietly stands up and walks away from a conversation, one where, in the past, they might have stayed explaining things again and again. Not because they stopped caring, but because they begin to realize that sometimes a gentle departure can say more than hundreds of words. Sometimes the message of Aries is found in the way they don't respond to a message right away, not to create distance, but to give themselves time to think, to feel, to understand what truly deserves a place in their heart. And sometimes that message appears even more simply, in the way Aries quietly steps away from things that no longer align with their path. No noise, no long explanations, just a very gentle step back. From a distance, some people may not understand this. They might think Aries is changing or becoming harder to read. But for Aries, that silence gradually becomes a very personal language, a language that does not need to be loud. It resembles a small flame burning in the darkness of night, not exploding with intensity, not demanding attention, just burning steadily, softly, enough to illuminate a small space ahead. That quiet flame reminds Aries that their energy is precious. Not every argument needs to continue. Not every misunderstanding must be explained immediately. Sometimes peace lives in simply letting things pass, like a soft wind moving along a long road. Some Aries have shared that when they begin living this way, they start feeling a very unfamiliar kind of calm inside their heart. Not the kind of peace that comes from life becoming perfect, but the kind that appears when someone realizes they are finally walking in rhythm with themselves. And in moments like that, Aries may also sense something that feels close to faith, a feeling similar to sitting in a quiet church, where candlelight flickers softly, and many believe that God listens to every prayer, even the ones never spoken aloud. That thought alone changes the meaning of Aries' silence. It no longer feels empty. Instead, it becomes a space where they can breathe more slowly, think more deeply, and allow their heart to settle after long days filled with emotion. Aries may still speak when something truly matters. The fire inside them has never disappeared, but now they begin to understand something important. Strength does not always live in speaking louder. Sometimes strength lives in knowing when to be silent, knowing when to preserve energy for what truly matters, knowing when to keep walking forward without needing to explain everything to everyone. And along that path, Aries slowly discovers something beautiful, that the moments when nothing is spoken often carry the deepest messages, because in those quiet spaces, the heart of Aries is still speaking to the world, in its own quiet language, gentle yet warm enough, like a small flame patiently burning through the long night, silently lighting the road ahead.